Good evening. This is a nice challenge. I have two challenges, actually. When Richard told me, you will chair the last panel, I said, thank you very much. And then he said, you will have Tammy, Lynda, and John. And I said, thank you very much, because this is exactly like herding stray cats. You have 3 stars on the stage, so I'm not going to talk a lot. 3 points, maybe. The first one is, thank you very much, Pierre, for this previous panel we had. I was absolutely delighted. I don't know if you had the same feeling as I had, but this was really brilliant. But we'll do better. But they were more numerous than we are, actually. The second point is, we talked a lot about Peter Drucker. And we talked about his vision, the futurism. And he was so good at foreseeing what would happen. But we forgot something this morning. Most of the work for which Peter is known is not about futurism. It's about management. He's been one of the most influential thinkers on management. And this is what this last panel is going to be about. Because as we talked a lot about what the future of capitalism can be, there is one point we have to make, and a question we have to ask, which is, what will be Management 2.0 if we start talking about capitalism 2.0? So for this, we have a wonderful panel. We could not have better people to talk about this. We are going to address this issue under very different angles. The first angle will be John Quelch. John is going to make the link between what has been said by Alexander before, state capitalism, but not from a Brazilian perspective, from a Chinese perspective. And as you know, in China, the relationship between state capitalism and social media is very much impacting what we can do in terms of management development. And so this will be our first speaker. And then Tammy will explain us what are the 10 unsustainable assumptions that we have, and that will shape how we can consider the management question under a different angle. And last, Lynda is going to address 5 key risks that people see for the future. Of course, this is a very interactive moment, as it is the last session, the last panel. I urge you to ask questions, make this entertaining and a very nice and fun moment for us as well. So let's start with John. John, can you tell us a little bit about state capitalism from a Chinese perspective? Yeah. And the problem you see with social media there.
Okay, thanks, Laurent.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Laurent. Thanks to Richard and the Drucker Forum for the opportunity to be here, and especially on a panel with Tammy and my former colleague, Lynda from London Business School. Let me start by just giving you 2 or 3 statistics about social media in China. So first of all, there are 530 million Chinese who are connected to the internet as we speak. Of those, around about 1/2 will be engaging in social media activity every day. The level of social media activity in China among the people who are on social media is higher in terms of number of minutes and in terms of penetration than it is in the United States. So this is just to say that the level of social media activity in China is really enormous. Viral marketing is of great importance to brand owners in China. This is just one example from Burberry, the British luxury brand, which has made a point internationally of being very prominent user of social media. In China, they do exactly the same. This is a collage of photographs that have been submitted primarily by people in China who have bought Burberry trench coats and who are submitting pictures of themselves in their Burberry trench coats to a social media website which is overseen by Burberry. The important thing to note here is that the level of recommunication of these kinds of photographs, of these kinds of social media communications is enormous and much higher in China than it is in the US. If you want to be a social brand, you have to do this kind of thing. You have to engage with your consumers in a very direct sense and enable them to engage with each other as well. In fact, one would go so far as to say, if you want to take advantage of social media, you have to make your brand social. Social media is not good for anti-social brands. So inevitably, in order to succeed, social media require the brand socialize itself and imagine how to do that. So let me turn to a second example. I'm not sure whether or not the General Counsel of Siemens is still with us, but this is a rather less pleasing example. This involves a gentleman by the name of Mr. Luo. And Mr. Luo had a Siemens refrigerator, and unfortunately the front door of the refrigerator didn't shut. So he took a video of this non-closing Siemens refrigerator door, posted it online, and then guess what? A lot of other Chinese consumers who'd bought that same refrigerator also had the same problem and also came and joined his discussion online. And before too long, he was outside the Siemens headquarters in China, smashing his refrigerator, and that was caught on video, and that was resent 170 million times in China. So if you happen to be the product manager for Siemens refrigerators in China, probably not a particularly pleasant time. But the point is that the power of social media in China to discipline the marketplace is not to be underestimated. This is just a simple or not so simple representation of the scope and scale and diversity of social media in China. You know, 6 of the top 10 most trafficked websites in the entire world are Chinese websites. And you probably won't know the names of any of them. Because since Facebook is blocked in China, since Twitter is blocked in China, and since Google's service is intermittent, you have a series of Chinese imitators that are extraordinarily powerful domestic brands, including Baidu. Baidu is the search engine of choice in China. Sina Weibo is the microblog service that is the equivalent of Twitter. And then Tencent, which is a listed company in Hong Kong. That particular company is in many, many segments of the social media marketplace. So this is an extremely substantial, well-developed, and complicated phenomenon. Approximately 54% of Chinese who have access to the internet are involved in social media activity each day. That compares to about 46% in the United States. Now, one aspect of social media that is very well developed in China is what we call social e-commerce. And this, in fact, involves group buying activity. There are approximately 4,000 websites in China which are essentially brokers of group buying activity. And this happens to be the Baidu site that you are looking at here. And the red numbers at the bottom indicate the price at which this particular item is available online. So that's 59 yuan, or around about $9 for that coat that you see on the left side there, as opposed to a quoted list price of 268. So you can see that that represents around about a 75% price cut. Now, the point about this group buying is that it can be organized by a third party, or it can be conducted by individual Chinese themselves. So someone might, for example, today in Shanghai decide they want to buy a Toyota Yaris. So they might post a note online and say, anyone interested in buying a Toyota Yaris? And in fact, someone did that 5 months ago. 55 people replied. 55 people replied. They formed a group. This group never knew each other before. They then went to a Toyota dealer and negotiated a price for all 55 of them as a group buying on an ad hoc basis individuals that previously had not known each other at all. It's also important to note that social e-commerce in China enables rural citizens who have not yet been able to access the retail infrastructure where a lot of goods are sold, enables them to purchase products which they can afford to, but where the growth rate in China has been so fast, the retail infrastructure has not been built out quickly enough in third and fourth tier cities. So you actually have a tremendous amount of this e-commerce activity that is going into rural areas, much as Sears Roebuck and Montgomery Ward 100 years ago in the United States, through mail order, were able to serve the needs of rural farmers. So what we are seeing in China with the advent of social media can be summed up perhaps in this slide here, where prior to the phenomenon of social media, you had a society that was very tightly controlled, and where each individual would really only trust or rely on a few individuals with whom they had either close family relationships or long-standing relationships as friends. What we're talking about here, Guanxi, which you often hear related to Chinese society, really means those very tight relationships that you have in your inner circle. Outside of the inner circle, you would have had really only state-controlled sources of information such as CCTV and China Daily, which is for example, the English language organ of the party. So what social media has done is it's opened up the landscape of communication to enable a much broader set of relationships, looser relationships, but broader set of relationships to come into play, so that many people are now influencing each other in China in a way that wasn't true 10 years ago. And this leads some people to ask the question whether or not social media represent what you might call the new opium of the masses. The Chinese government, of course, has allowed high-speed internet access. And the Chinese government has been very proud of its contribution in that regard. The social media represent a safety valve for individuals to have a say about a lot of different things, both products and services, but also about policy issues as well. And although there is still censorship in China, and the so-called Great Firewall of China does exist, to censor out sensitive discussions on sensitive issues, The fact of the matter is that this social media has been a very important growth phenomenon to enable Chinese to communicate with each other. But the key question is whether or not the genie is out of the bottle, whether or not this phenomenon of social media interaction is going to take on a level of political intensity that in the end will not be controllable. So we find that social media is actually being used very extensively these days by citizens in China to address issues that previously the government would have had very tight control over. So this is a picture of a very severe train accident that occurred earlier this year. And unfortunately for the Chinese railway authorities, their attempts to bury the carriages that came off the rails in the middle of the night before sunrise basically failed because microblogging, smartphone technology, SMS, transmission enabled the victims of this train crash to communicate immediately and broadly across all of China what had actually happened. And so something like this, this story would have been dead and buried, but in actuality was not buried and could no longer be buried. And in fact, in the end, heads rolled at the Railway Administration Department for various safety issues that had come into play in causing the accident. You know, another example is highlighted by this particular gentleman, Mr. Yang. Mr. Yang was the head of the Shanxi Bureau of Work Safety. But it turns out that on a salary of $5,000 a year, he's photographed wearing 5 or 6 different Rolex watches. So this you know, happens to be a series of posts that some citizen in Shanxi decided this guy is corrupt and we're going to make sure that he is dealt with. And so instead of filing a complaint with the authorities, what you do is photograph Mr. Yang wearing his collection of Rolex watches, and sure enough, Mr. Yang today is behind bars. And so the social media becomes a mechanism for not just policing the commercial marketplace, but also policing the political marketplace. And also, I might say, the NGO marketplace, because here we have a lady who's 20 years old driving a Maserati and claiming to be the general manager of Red Cross Commerce in China on her blog. So unfortunately, not only did she go down, but on top of that, the Red Cross in China as a brand has been totally destroyed as a result of the irresponsible actions of this particular person. The final one I'll mention in this series of vignettes is what we call the Italian job. A company called Da Vinci in China is a retailer of luxury furniture purporting to be imported from Italy. Unfortunately, some video footage was posted online that showed that this furniture was actually made in China and then shipped all the way to Italy to be relabeled as made in Italy, and then came back to China to be sold at customarily premium Italian prices. So this particular example is a great example of what we call destructive entrepreneurship. Destructive in the sense that, you know, it's not just a funny story, but it actually undermines confidence in brands and in the marketplace. But again, the social media outed this woman, who's the owner of the company, put it in very close to bankruptcy condition. And subsequently, we have seen that she has been able to pop up again in another company. So what does that tell you? What it tells you is that the growth rate in China has been so quick that the rule of law hasn't been able to keep pace. And you cannot create an army of consumer product safety inspectors overnight. There is no tradition of that profession yet developed in China. So the rapid growth rate means that there is a commercial jungle there, and the social media really play an important part in policing that jungle. So what we have is a situation, I think, which looks something like this, where the social media are facilitating a lot of commercial exchanges. They are facilitating a lot of dialogue amongst consumers regarding products and services and brands, what's good, what's not good. All of that is actually building a level of mutual trust among the consumer population, and that consumer population, every time it transacts, an exchange between a buyer and seller occurs, that becomes part of the positive social glue that helps to bind together the overall Chinese society. And the question is whether or not this pattern of interaction will eventually become unstoppable and move into the political arena in a fashion that ends up resulting in greater democratic participation on the part of the population in policy decision-making as opposed to just what brand to buy. So let me stop there, and I'll look forward to your questions later. Thank you. Okay.
John, you've been a prominent actor of very influential business schools in the Western world, the London Business School, Harvard. Now you're in most probably one of the very interesting and thrilling experience that is developed in China. We know that management has been developed in the US, in Europe, over the 20th century. Do you think today, as an observer of what happens, as also someone who graduates around 1,000 MBA students per year, that's a new framework of management, a new paradigm of management can be invented in China in the coming years?
Okay. So I think that what Alexander said regarding state capitalism in Brazil is very much mirrored today in China. Obviously, there is a large measure of the economy that is state-controlled. These state enterprises have appalling financial underperformance in terms of return on invested capital, return on assets. They secure funding and capital at privileged rates from the state-controlled banking system. They pay nothing for the land on which their enterprises operate. So I think that the degree to which they retain their stature at the moment is very much a function of market-destroying privileges that undermine the access of private enterprise to capital at reasonable levels in support of subsidies that go to state enterprises. So I wouldn't look for any insight into a new model of capitalism coming from that particular quarter. In fact, if anything, the new leadership in China, which was, by the way, announced today, apparently probably didn't cause as much excitement in the room as the American presidential election, but in a sense that's a commentary on, an unfortunate commentary on the fact that we don't actually think enough about China. We're still too Western-centric in our thinking. But where, if I may, I just say where I think your question could have a yes answer, it's in terms of leadership and management styles. Not so much in the model of the economy, but more in leadership and management styles, where I think there are some very unique aspects to the Chinese culture that play into the way in which management has to operate in China. I won't say it's necessarily better, but I certainly find that as a manager in China, I have to do things very differently from the way I would do them in London or Boston.
And do you think it's going to be exported out?
Also on the confidence of consumers and citizens to be participative and to know how to participate, and the confidence of managers to let control go to their people rather than want to be still the big boss.
Okay. Very nice.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Then it's... it leads me to an introduction question to Tammy, actually, because what John just said about China, thinking of inventing a new model of management, questions also what is not sustainable today. So maybe that's what you're going to talk about in a second.
It is indeed. Thank you. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here with you today. I want to thank Richard and everyone for inviting me. You know, I had the privilege and the great pleasure of knowing Peter Drucker, and in fact having an opportunity to work with him. And one of my happiest memories is walking into a reception one day, a large group of people, and seeing this very dapperly dressed, wonderful man across the room going, "Hi, Tammy," and it was Peter. And I remember that feeling and the joy it gave me then whenever I think of him and the lessons. Now, one of the experiences that I had with him, he used to speak quite often on panels and in programs that the company I was with ran. And one of his requests was that somebody would sit up on the stage with him in case someone from the audience asked a question that was difficult to hear. And I was always happy to do that. The first time I did it, and Laurent, I'll say this partly for you, the first time I did it, I thought, well, I must have some role other than just waiting for a question. So as we got near the end of the time, I began to make what I thought were very subtle little hand signals to Peter that it was time to wrap up his remarks. He stopped in the middle of his sentence and said, "Young lady, you stop that. I know exactly what time it is." So, I'll try not to need that.
I won't stop you.
Okay. Well, my remarks today are titled 10 Assumptions That Are No Longer True. And I got interested in this topic because I found myself talking with many executives who didn't really know why they were doing something. The question of why do we do it the way we do it, I find today increasingly comes down to, I don't know. It's the way we've always done it. And in fact, as you roll back the layers, what you find is a set of assumptions that are no longer true. I want to share 10 of those with you today, but before I do, I want to take just a second on the context. Now, tomorrow, if you're able to join us, I'm going to speak for a few moments about what I would consider the context for this, and that is the link between capitalism and our organizations today. I don't know how many of you had the opportunity to hear Roger Martin's wonderful talk this morning. I love his work, and I loved the talk that he gave. But with great respect, I'd like to say he's wrong.
You can ask questions afterwards if you want.
In at least one regard, and that is in putting customer and shareholder as the two ends of a spectrum. I personally think that that's a concept which is a bit confusing, and frankly, to people who've been leading over the past 20 or even 50 years, perhaps even a bit insulting. I think that Peter Drucker's views that customers are what a business is about is something that we've always believed. And it is something that managers have strove for over decades past. The problem is that the way we got there, the resources that we needed to energize in order to get there, were different in the past than they are today. And that leads to my first assumption. What do you need to do to be successful? I think that needs to be rethought. The old assumption was that to be successful, you had to manage capital well. You had to access it, you had to conserve it, you had to keep your costs low and get as much revenue as possible. It was a financially driven set of assumptions of how, in fact, you would serve your customer well. The companies that did it became icons. They figured out how to do mass production, how to organize themselves in hierarchical ways and standardize processes. And they became the companies that we'll all remember as the standouts of the past century. But I would argue that that assumption isn't true anymore. Capital is not the scarce resource, and managing it well is not going to drive you to be the iconic company of tomorrow. Today's scarce resource is idea. It's intellectual capital. I like to call it intelligence. Today's scarce resource is our ability to mobilize the intelligence of people around us, to tap into social media perhaps, to find ways to combine two ideas to come up with something new. That's what we should be holding up together. This pursuit of shareholder value and the pursuit of return on ideas. Those are the two that compare, and that's the big change that's occurring today. In each case, as I talk about these assumptions, I'm just going to rattle off a few ideas that I think you should take on, and I'll do it without great explanation, so catch me later if you want more. Here's what I think you should do with regard to this assumption. First of all, you should change your strategic metrics. Stop investing in projects based on net present value and internal rate of return. Start thinking about your investments in terms of maximizing the power of the idea. Second, you need to redesign your organizations. Move away from hierarchical organizations designed for consistency and standardization, and develop organizations that are optimized around the flow of ideas, that have strong horizontal challenges. And third, you need to change your staffing plans. Instead of hiring people with deep specialization, you need to hire people who have some breadth, who have the capability of understanding how their areas of expertise can contribute to the whole. That's the first. The second thing you should need to rethink are your operations. And the underlying reason there is that your operations today are based on an old assumption about what it costs to communicate. John has just given us some great examples that show how wrong those assumptions are, even in the last decade. The cost of communication has changed dramatically. And what it basically means is you should be substituting what I like to call coordination for planning and scheduling in almost every process in your organization. You should be looking for ways in the moment to find out where things are, where people are, and create the coordination rather than investing in the long-term planning. Redesign your processes starting today. The opportunity is at least as great, if not greater, than re-engineering was in the 1980s. Third, rethink the role of a leader. You know, if you look in the dictionary, it says that a leader is someone who's out in front, who has the answers. I don't think that's a reasonable assumption today. Leaders can't be out in front, and they certainly can't have all the answers. They don't even have access to the best information in many cases. A leader today needs to be someone who knows how to work with adults, treat people like adults, and create a context in which those adults are going to do their best work. So, select leaders by getting input from the people who will be led. We heard earlier about an employee-owned company. Adopt those practices in your own and get input about who would be the best person to create the context in the group you want to lead. And make sure those leaders spend their time soliciting ideas from others. Fourth, talent availability. Now, this was one of Peter Drucker's big themes, of course. He argued that when historians look back on the past century, even with computers and people in space and all of those kinds of things, that historians will say the biggest event of the 20th century was demography. It was lower birth rates and higher life expectancies, because those two things have fundamentally changed the shape of our populations. We no longer in most countries have pyramids, a few older people and a lot of kids. Most of us already today are at least diamonds, pretty narrow at the bottom, there aren't that many kids, and at some point we'll probably actually be an inverted pyramid in the other direction. Now, the problem with that is most of your talent management practices in your companies are predicated on the assumption of a pyramid. Here's what you need to do. Eliminate mandatory retirement, if you still have it, right away. Make your workplace conducive to older workers, including invest in development of older workers, train them, and create career paths that give them the flexibility to work in the ways that they would like to. Get prepared to fight for a disproportionate share of talent if you have to hire young people, because they're going to be scarce resources. And maybe most importantly, rethink career paths, moving away from the idea that promotion can always be the answer for everyone who wants more money and more opportunity. Fifth thing to rethink, do you need employees? The old assumption was we had them. That's what businesses were. That won't be true going forward. Contingent workers and a whole variety of alternative arrangements will be the ones that we'll see most common. You need to define your organization around the ideas and the customers those ideas are serving, not by the relationship of the people that are part of it. So right away, shift the metrics you use to judge your HR department. Stop measuring retention. Why do you care that they've held on to some mediocre person for 20 years who was never particularly well qualified for any of the job in any of those 20 years? That's not relevant. Instead, create a metric that measures the fit between a person's capabilities and the job they're being asked to do. Ask yourself what percentage of your organization is well qualified for the jobs you're asking for. And one of Peter Drucker's recommendations under this heading is charge your HR department with managing a broad set of talent, much like a film talent agency would, so that they're responsible for having part-time and contingent and contract and employees and can assemble the right team for you at the right time. 6, don't ever think everybody wants the same thing. The idea that all employees want the same thing, everybody will be turned on by money or security, is not a valid assumption. Assumptions vary by generation and by geography and by other factors as well. My big recommendation here is don't fall in the trap that I hear so often of we need to create global consistency in our talent management practices. I think that's one of the most harmful phrases around today. You need individual customization. 7, rethink the contract that you have between employees, workers, and your organization. You know, the old contract used to be, I'll be loyal, and the company will provide me long-term protection and care. That assumption's gone. No companies can provide long-term protection and care in every case, but we haven't really acknowledged it. It's time to get rid of that assumption and be honest about what companies, in fact, can provide. Here's what you need to do. Remove all tenure-based practices. Retirement benefits, vacation benefits, promotion, none of that should be based on tenure. It should all be based on capability or qualification. Ensure that your management messaging is credible. Stop saying we're not going to lay any more people off, if in fact we all know that's not a reality. And work to establish a new equation that people honestly can trust. Figure out what your company can do and make that clear. 8, rethink the role of a career. Most of us grew up at a time when people had one major job. That was our career. That's not going to be true today. Most of the middle-aged people I've interviewed as part of my research on the generations already have 2 jobs. They're working for a company and they're doing something on the side. So assume that more and more of your employees are being distracted, if you will, pulled away from your organization by other exciting things they're pursuing outside work, and fight for that attention. 9, rethink how you measure performance. We've gotten used to measuring performance around an individual. Are they a superstar? Do they have potential? I think those things are wrong for today. We need to ask, has the person contributed to the task we wanted to achieve? We need to make performance management timed with tasks. We need to institute peer feedback because managers have a difficult time telling who actually contributed. And we need to tie compensation to team-based performance under those conditions of team-based input. And finally, my 10th is we need to rethink reliance on money. Most of us have grown up thinking that, well, if I pay them enough, they'll take on this crummy job, or move to places that I want them to move, or work harder even. There's so much research on that today. We know that particularly with knowledge-based work, it's simply not true. The code word for today is meaning. Meaning is the new money. And so the last thing I would recommend to you is very similar to what Kathy Mazars said about her work at Graybar. Figure out what is unique about your organization. She clearly has. And find ways to make the uniqueness of your organization come through so that you attract people who are predisposed to love what it's going to be like working with you, who love the meaning of being part of your organization. Those are the assumptions and some of my recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. Wait. No, okay. I also have a transition question to you, because that's the way it goes. And Lynda, be prepared with this. My question is, what, in your opinion, is the biggest opportunity that will ease or facilitate these shifts? Because you're talking about big shifts. So
right.
What will be the...
I have an answer to that, actually. I think if I could just do one thing, and I know I've given you a laundry list, you probably think, oh my goodness, who could do that? If I had to do one thing, I'd put in place peer review systems. Mm-hmm. I think peer review systems are the most powerful single lever that we have to begin to change the culture in our companies. It does several things. It makes me as an individual interested in that horizontal networking, in making sure that my contributions are effective to the team and not just pleasing to my boss. So I would put that in place as my first step in the transformation.
And this is very interesting because you listened to Patrick de Cambourg a bit earlier on, and in partnerships, for instance, you know them inside out as well. This is exactly the mode that we use. When you're partners, you cannot have a hierarchical way of evaluating. You need to refer to this peer coaching thing, which is exactly one of the points I absolutely like. Then, when we talk about opportunities, one of the issues is also to measure what the risks are. And I'd like maybe Lynda to elaborate on this, because in a way, Tammy showed us a way, but you've conducted a study that shows that there are maybe some major risks, but also, of course, opportunities. We had the very nice testimonial from John. He now lives in China, so every morning he wakes up and he says, there is no crisis, there are only opportunities, because it's the same, you know, this same sign in China. So maybe, Lynda, can you tell us a bit more about the results of this study and what you take away from this in terms of the big risks and maybe the big opportunities as well to change this world?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you to you in advance.
Thank you so much. It's marvelous to be on this panel. Both of these people I've known for many, many years, so it feels a wonderful thing. You know, and I love coming to the Drucker conference. I wasn't able to come last year, but I was the year before, and I thought it was a marvelous opportunity for you know, like-minded people to have a conversation. And thank you so much to Richard for creating this wonderful context for us to have a conversation. Those of you who know me know that usually when I stand up to speak, I do a presentation, capital P, and it's got, you know, great big marvelous slides behind it. But I decided, in the spirit of Drucker, not to do that today. And what I wanted to do really was just simply to share with you some observations and thoughts. And I wanted, in particular, to talk about something that Drucker was very close to his heart, which is the idea about the inside and the outside of a corporation. And what I want to suggest to you, and I'm sort of suggesting it to myself as well, so it's sort of an internal monologue as well as a conversation. What I'd like to suggest is that there are things in this world, in terms of the outer context, which are incredibly important now for corporations, which is putting corporations at risk and is indeed creating a whole set of new ways of thinking about the role of leadership and the role of management. I know a number of us in this room today were in Dubai this week at the World Economic Forum, and I came over last night from Dubai. I chair the WEF Council on New Models of Leadership, which is a marvelous group of people from academia and NGOs and organizations talking about the future of leadership, actually. And one of the things about the WEF, and I know, you know, some of us spend quite a lot of our time at it, and we have mixed feelings about it, but nevertheless, what the WEF is wonderful at is convening some of the most interesting people in the world together, and we were just speaking about this a moment ago. So in Dubai this week, there were 1,000 people from all over the world, particularly from China, particularly from Africa and South America. And the reason I go and spend a lot of my time, not a lot, but some of my time involved in the WEF is it gives you a very good idea about the zeitgeist. And I don't need to tell you what the zeitgeist is, because you have your own opinion of it. But let me just sort of fresh off the plane from Dubai, although I did manage to have a cup of coffee and one of those marvelous cakes that they make in Vienna. Stefan Stern, no, what are they called?
Apfelstrudel.
Yeah, they're just, oh, so I'm feeling like a new person, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so these were the three things that I think were in the zeitgeist, and I've certainly been writing about them as well. That is in the external context. The first one is youth unemployment. I actually have a son who's trying to get a job at the moment. He's 21 years old. He's got about the most amazing CV any child could have, and he got his first rejection yesterday. which is hard for a kid who's been brought up by us baby boomers to think that they can walk on water. Guess what? Nobody even wants to interview him. And of course, he's incredibly privileged. Imagine what it's like for kids around the world. There were a whole bunch of people from the Arab states there, and we had a forum yesterday on youth unemployment, and they said, look, frankly, the simple situation is, unless we can sort this out in the Arab world, we are going to have incredible civil turmoil. We just have to think about the way that we educate our children. The second one, of course, is climate change. And I'm not going to say much about that because Paul, of course, is here tomorrow. And I've just finished a book called The Key, which is about what corporations have to do in the future, but it won't be published because of these extraordinary publication timeframes until this time next year at the very earliest. But it does talk about Paul's work at Unilever. And of course, one of the things that he said, and he'll say it tomorrow, is he's been one of the most courageous CEOs around the world to say we will reduce CO2 by 50% within a very short time frame. And he's put himself very much on the block. And there was a marvelous piece, Julia is here from Harvard Business Review, but they did a marvelous piece in Harvard Business Review where he described that. So clearly climate change is of real concern. And then the third is, obviously, poverty for those countries that haven't been touched by globalization, and indeed inequality. And that, as we know, I don't need to go into the details on that, but many of you know that unequal societies create incredible problems in terms of mobility and indeed in terms of people's capacity to meet their potential. Now, those three challenges, I think, are sitting in the context right now, and maybe it's because I'm nearing 60, but I'm very concerned about these, and perhaps it's a legacy thing. But, I'm worried that our generation is handing over these incredible problems to the generation that we've brought up. Now, one of the questions you may want to ask, and certainly I've asked, is, well, why aren't we solving these problems? And the challenge that really comes up with these external context problems is that they involve multi-stakeholders. That would mean governments, that means NGOs, it means corporations, it means civil societies. And right now, in the world, we don't have a means by which we can create alliances at scale between those stakeholder groups. So what I want to sort of say by way of finishing in terms of the external context is, there's a whole set of what looks like intractable problems, which will change the quality of life of our children. And that, by the way, is why Paul has made the courageous decision he's made. It will change the quality of life of our children. And even though we have these marvelous tools at our disposal, and John did a wonderful presentation, actually, of what those tools are in terms of social media, in terms of abundant knowledge, and so on and so forth. I mean, the simple truth is that those tools are not, at the moment, helping us solve those problems. They're identifying them, they're creating clarity about them, but they're not actually being used yet at any scale to solve them. So that's the external context. So what's happening inside corporations? Well, over the last 3 years, I've worked with my research institute with about 60 companies around the world, and some of you here are a member of our research. And we've built a consortium called the Future of Work Consortium, FOW. And to do that, we have run workshops all around the world. We've built a platform which allows companies to talk to each other about big issues. In fact, we're running a worldwide jam on Monday to talk about the future of leadership. And we'll have thousands and thousands of people from around the world jamming for 2 days on our platform about that topic. And at the same time, we've also asked them, what do you see as the big challenges for your company in the future, and how well developed are you right now? And we actually have empirical data on that. And I wanted just to share with you the key risks that they're seeing right now. And this comes from about 60 companies, many of them you'll be very familiar with, based in Europe, in the US, and we have quite a big Asian contingent as well. But sadly, no Chinese companies.
Lynda, mostly Western companies? Are
well, Unilever would be one, right. British Telecom, Cisco, P&G, you know, big brands, so big multinationals. Those right. are the sort of companies. Okay. And these are the 4 risks that they've identified. And for me, a risk is something that you know is important for the future, but you haven't solved it yet. So the difference between, I think it's important, but we can't do anything about it, is what I'm using to describe the word risk. And these are the 4 things that are coming out. Firstly, collaborating across boundaries. So most corporations right now will say that our capacity to really build value internally, and of course Tammy said exactly the same thing, is compromised by our capacity to work across boundaries, to build cooperative capability across boundaries. The second one they're talking about is open innovation. Now, by open innovation, I mean the capacity of an organization to use its technology to crowdsource and to involve large numbers of people in building new products. We're actually here in Austria, very near the heart of open innovation. Perhaps some of you know that Bavaria is one of the most advanced regions in the world. I don't know if you knew this, on open innovation. The Bavarian government put many billions of euros into building innovation, open innovation, and has done so over the last 5 years. And so if you look at companies like BMW and Audi and so on, they're really very advanced in terms of their open innovation. But other companies realize that they just don't know how. As Tammy said, you've got all these wonderful ideas, but companies are really struggling knowing what to do about that. So that's the second. The third, and again, Tammy's mentioned it, but, and is also an expert in it, is generational cohesion. And by that I mean, how does an organization encourage and enable its different generations to work together? And there's a lot of concern in the companies that we've researched about how they do that. And then the fourth is exactly John's point, actually, which is a sort of Twitter point. One of the people in my leadership council is the woman who runs human resources in Infosys. Many of you I know Infosys. It employs 200,000 people. It's a huge IT company. It's based out of India. And they've been very advanced in their use of Twitter. But of course, what she's found within her leadership cohort is that Twitter storms move really in a very unpredictable way. Those of you who are following the UK news, I don't know if you've seen this. I don't know if it's been picked up in Europe. It's the most extraordinary story of a person in the House of Lords being named as a paedophile. And he has just said this morning through his lawyer that he will sue every single person who made that act. Now that's going to change Twitter in Europe, because he's now suing every single person on Twitter who named him as a paedophile. That's never been done before. So it's clear that leadership is going through this extraordinary transition when everything that you do is Twittered and noticed and videoed and so on. And companies are concerned about that, and they're worried about how they're going to help their leaders. You saw it just in the US this last few days about someone losing their job because of a whole stream of emails that were made public. So, I mean, you know, what we tend to use as the word to describe the leader we want is authentic. And of course, you've seen this word authenticity many times. I think it's very difficult to know how to develop it, but it's obviously important. So let me just finish by saying this, that the paradox is that at the very time the external context is crying out for us to be able to build alliances between different stakeholders, at the same time, corporations are struggling in the same way internally. Now, I don't have time to go into the argument now, and it's the argument that I've described in my new book, the key. But the argument I want to make is that corporations, more than any other institutional form in the world right now, are better able to take the lead on alliance building. But to do that, we have to build strong internal capability to build cooperation. And there are organizations around the world who are doing that. Tata Consulting Services, for example, are now very advanced in how you build collaboration in a virtual environment. P&G, of course, have built incredible open innovation. So I just want to finish by saying that there are tough problems out there. Corporations can play a role, but I think if there's one thing they have to focus on, it's how do you prepare managers and leaders to cooperate and collaborate across complex boundaries. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynda. So as you can imagine, I would have plenty of questions to ask, but let's change the name of the game. You have the floor, so ask question, but the name of the game is also that by the end I will ask you a question to wrap up this session, so to you. So, who starts? If the first question is too difficult to ask, start with the second. Okay, I have one question here. Please, by the way, I have heard so many people telling their name because you are asked to tell your name, but you tell your name so quickly that nobody understands who you are, and then you start speaking slowly. So say slowly who you are, so that everybody can pick you up tonight at the gala dinner.
My name is Martin Porter.
Excellent.
That's nice.
Thank you, Martin.
M-A-R-T-I-N.
Excellent.
I work for a company called Theme. And Ms. Gratton, I would just like to hear more about your son.
Can I say?
And how we're thinking through that problem, because I've been on the losing end of that problem for a while, actually. I just got out of it, but there were years where I have my, whatever an impressive CV is anymore, I thought I had one, and I was in dire straits in 2 different countries. So I would just like to hear about what the panel would have to say about that problem and how we can think through that one. Briefly.
Well, I mean, because I have a child who's moving towards unemployment, I'm actually very interested in youth unemployment. And I just wanted to say a few things about that. In regions of the world which have relatively low youth unemployment, and I'm thinking about some regions in Germany and certainly Singapore, which very rarely goes above 6%, what you get is a very good alliance between the government, who signals into the job market what they think the jobs are needed for the future, institutions who then also try to build work-ready skills, and individuals who are also have some sort of there's a strong signaling capacity and alliance building. And I happen to be on the advisory board of the Singaporean Ministry of Manpower. And I've been doing that role for many, many years. And what's very clear to me is the only way out of this, I mean, there is also a question of job creation through entrepreneurship and so on, but I want to leave that aside for a moment. But just in terms of, you know, signaling to the market, what is it you should be doing? I was coming back from Dubai yesterday, and you shouldn't be sitting in a car with me at the moment. I'm definitely in my mad phase. And this very sweet professor from Cambridge was saying to me, oh, I'm so pleased, you know, because my daughter's just got in to do art history at University of Southern California. And I said, stop immediately. Tell her absolutely not. You know, all the research shows art history is the worst degree that you can do to get a job. And he said, really? I said, absolutely. Read my book, The Shift. I'm just sending him a copy of it, actually. So, you know, we just have to have a high level of alliance building between these stakeholders and also sort of intelligence about the market. But of course, as Tammy and I know, our children never listen to us.
She's just laughing because I have a daughter who majored in art history. So.
That's why I was laughing with Tammy then. Does she have a job?
Yes, she does. Yes, she does.
There you go. There's always one.
Does
I'm not going
have
to ask Tammy what
here?
she does, by the way.
Right, second question. Okay, here we go. Sorry. So, who are you slowly?
Thank you. I'm Eva Hellström, representing the Finnish Innovation Fund.
What's the first name, sorry?
Eva.
Thank you.
And Lynda, I was very happy that you mentioned the word climate change, because I feel that one important aspect behind the criticism against capitalism has been the rise of the environmental concerns. But yet we have not heard much talk about the environment here today, and I would like to ask your opinions about the importance of this topic.
Well, I think it's the most important issue there is right now. I think that, and that's partly, by the way, because we've been lucky really in many ways, that one of the long-term supporters of my research has been Shell, the Royal Dutch Shell, to give them their proper name. And those of you who don't follow their scenarios really should. I mean, they do scenario planning. In fact, they're just about to bring another one out this year because because things are changing so fast. And I run a one-week program for my MBA students at London Business School on the future. And we get the scenario planners of Shell to come in quite early on in the week, and it's absolutely scary stuff. It really, really is scary. And I wrote about it in my book, The Shift, and I've done it again in the Key, and the publishers are saying to me, Lynda, please, could you stop starting on such a negative? Can't we have it really bright? But actually, it's the most important thing there is. And one of the concerns I have, and the reason I am beginning to talk a lot more about climate change, is that there's a complete disconnect between people who work inside corporations in HR departments and strategy and CSR people. They're not connected at all, either in terms of their networking or indeed in terms of the books that each other read. And I think it's really important that we begin to factor that in to everything we do. And you'll have an opportunity tomorrow with Paul to hear, I'm sure that Adrian will ask him lots of questions about what he's doing in detail, but we've written quite a detailed case about what he's done, and you'll find that, for example, they've completely changed the way that people work in Unilever because they realized that getting people to offices and putting them in an office all day was creating an enormous carbon footprint. So, I mean, I'll let him describe it, but I think that within the next 5 years, every single CEO in the world will have to have a point of view about that. There's a really strong sustainability argument being created. And by the way, it hasn't come out yet, but Julia Kirby from Harvard knows this, that there is a working paper that's just been published internally at Harvard that shows that organizations with a sustainability agenda outperform on the capital markets organizations that don't have a sustainability agenda. And I think that if you're interested in the money side of your business, then every CEO has to ask why they've decided not to do anything.
Lynda, allow me to pass on the question to John, because he's operating in an environment which is sensitive to this question, I guess. What would be your answer to the question?
China has probably contributed more environmental damage in the last 10 years than any other nation in history.
That's not true. America's done pretty well, John.
The situation, the environmental degradation in China from very rapid economic development has been devastating. In fact, if you look at the GDP per capita cost associated with this degradation, it almost wipes out the GDP growth rate in China. And the problem is that while the government in China is at the central level extremely sensitive to this issue and wants to deal with it, all of their metrics for measuring the performance of provincial governors and mayors within the party system are built around economic growth rate. And so if it's a choice, coming back to short-termism from this morning, if there's a choice between making my numbers as a provincial governor in terms of economic growth and damaging the environment, I will damage the environment and make my numbers. So that is, you know, a little bit of the inside story on the environment in China.
Don't take my question as a provocation, but is it something you teach in the MBA to your Chinese students? Because Lynda says it's important for future CEO to take this into account. So,
I mean, our entire MBA degree is modeled on the theme of, quote, responsible leadership, unquote, which is regarded as, you know, quite surprising for a China-based business school. But we are more an international school in China in the same way as INSEAD is an international school in France. But the other thing that we do, which I think is quite unusual, is all our students are required to do a team project on sustainability. And so we have to source a large number, maybe 40 or 50 projects each year to enable all of our students to work for an organization. It could be a Chinese state enterprise or private enterprise or a multinational company on a sustainability issue or problem related to China. So that's an important compulsory requirement of the MBA curriculum.
Superb, thank you. The third question, so we have several questions over there maybe, and then later on my left-hand side, which is your right-hand side. So we have one there, one there.
That sounds fantastic.
Sorry.
Yeah, that sounds really
Bill Liao from Coder Dojo. We teach kids around the world how to program computers for free. Just a quick question back on China. I also run a charity called We Forest, and we run the numbers on tree planting nations, and China happens to be the #1 tree planting nation on earth. And so I just want to say that. The question though is, you say, okay, China has environmental degradation. Isn't that just America and Europe exporting an enormous amount of their environmental degradation down the chain?
So I think that's a good question. I think there is an element in that, but I think, you know, it's really a function of China assuming this factory to the world role and embracing that over the last 15 to 20 years, and all of the plants, all of the industry that has been developed, especially fueled by coal, which is unclean coal is extremely important as an energy source in China. So, you know, it's just, listen, it's something that Chinese young people are very concerned about. We had a protest 2 weeks ago in China, in Ningbo, which effectively stopped groundbreaking on a new plant because there was not sufficient concern apparently shown to the environmental impact on the local population. And this has now led the Communist Party to require what they call a social risk assessment, which is essentially an assessment of the risk of social instability to be conducted for any major industrial project. So the concern among the population of China is now very palpable, and it is undoubtedly going to play out in terms of environmental control policies being more completely implemented and reliably implemented at the local level, rather than, as has been the case before, as I said, being put to one side in the interests of making the economic growth numbers each year. But I do agree with you that a certain amount of what has happened in China is a function of the West outsourcing its manufacturing to China.
Okay, next question. I take 2 last questions, and then we do a little game together to close the session and the day.
Yeah.
Where are you? Sorry, I can't see you.
I'm here. Well,
oh, hello.
Yeah, my name is Choain, and I'm working in the field of management consulting, specialized in organization development. on all the issues that were raised, like innovation, collaboration, communication, is exactly what we're facing as things that seem to be difficult in organizations. What we are interested in is in research on how social media will maybe or probably impact the way organizations will be led, will work together. Even seeing, I think most of people are maybe immigrants, social immigrants, so as soon as the social natives or digital natives will enter organizations, I'm sure they will have totally different ways of communicating, collaborating already as they are connecting to the world from their rooms, from their children's rooms. So my question is, what do you think, how social media has the power to impact and will impact organizations now already or latest when digital natives are arriving there?
Tammy and John, maybe?
I'll start. Well, it's a very smart question because you're really looking at what are they doing. And that's my fundamental recommendation is don't look so much at what media particularly they're using, but try to understand the underlying activity that they're doing with that media. And I mentioned very briefly that I see them more as coordinators than planners. And let me give you a quick example. If you think about how someone my age might get together with a friend for dinner, I would probably phone call, but I certainly would do it well in advance. And the nature of the exchange I would have with my friend would be to develop a plan. We would decide on when and where and how and so forth, right? If you look at the young people with their use of technology, and it doesn't matter if they're using, you know, Facebook or texting or what they're doing, they're much more likely, one, of course, to do it immediately, not far in advance. But the most interesting thing is that rather than develop a plan, they will exchange coordinates. So one will text, "Where are you?" and the other one will answer, and they'll then begin a process that's almost like ships using radar of homing in on each other through this coordination process. So it's a fundamentally different way of getting things done. And it's those kinds of things that we need to look for in our businesses. So the question I would pose to you there would be, where could you use this wonderful capability we now have for coordination? Because of course you don't even have to ask, where are you? You can just look at the little dot on your iPhone and see where your friends are if they've all hooked themselves up. So we now have this powerful coordinating capability, which can in some cases replace planning and scheduling. Look for where you can actually replace activities and focus on the activity, not on the particular technology associated with it.
Very interesting.
John? Lynda, anything to say?
Okay.
Right?
I could say one thing, I've written a piece for Harvard Business Review, you'll see it in January, with actually somebody who's written with you as well, Tammy Jones from Manpower, which is about the evolution of virtual working. And one of the things that we've noticed with regard to your question actually is that, you know, what social media and technology did was it disconnected people from the physicality of work, and people then were able to work in all sorts of different places. But what is now happening is people, particularly those who want to keep on establishing face-to-face or want to meet different types of people, but they want to see them, is that this notion of hubs, and more corporations are getting involved in working with other companies to build hubs around a country. In fact, my research institute is based in one of those hubs. It's called Somerset House, which is in the centre of London. The largest creative hub actually in England, in the UK right now, and it's just full of different types of people, and they meet each other all the time. So I think you're seeing a slight rebalancing of you know, technology versus face-to-face.
Very nice. Let's finish by a game. The game is this. My question is, what do you think is in common is at the intersection of the three keynotes we heard. I will ask the question to one rank here. So please do not make long statements. Do not repeat lectures. Just give me in one sentence what you take away as being the common message you've heard in these three testimonials. But then I will ask the same question to all of you in turn. Okay? Tammy, John, and Lynda, if you agree. And if this has not been quoted, I would then finish with my own vision of what was common in what you say, what was your intersection in what you brought to the party tonight. So the question is, of course, which rank? I'm not going to go to the back. This rank. Okay, very nice. We start, then you go and give the mic to your neighbor. Okay, you can choose which kind of neighbor you like most.
I'm Professor of Business and Management. And I think all these three talks show that the future of management is here already. It just, we're moving closer to a tipping point. And all these new ideas and emerging ideas already here.
So we are close to the big jump.
Yes.
Very nice. Okay, then, pass on the mic.
Oh,
Peter, go. No. This way.
I think that we are going in the right direction. I think there was a vast intellectual gap, and it is being filled, and I think it's perhaps more than anything else is being filled by the Drucker group and people.
Excellent. Thank you.
I get a sense that the paradigm has shifted,
that
the players and the noise, there's a lot of noise in the system, and that the players are searching like hell for the rules of the new game, and we haven't found it yet.
Well, I would like to build on that when I was saying we need to be ready for change and embrace change, because that's what's happening around us right now.
If we follow the recommendations of our prominent speakers, we will make a big jump.
Okay. Next.
I think we all underestimate the power of social media for the future. I think that will be a big jump for all of us.
A game changer, yeah?
It's time to develop new HR configurations across the continent.
Thank you very much.
I think this is a time for the Asians more connection with the other part of the world that you mentioned about how to create hubs of the connection of face-to-face via the social media. That's my part of the actions and create a hub between Thailand, Korea, and EU country. Thank you.
Thank you. So Lynda, what is your opinion about this? What was the intersection between you three?
Well, I mean, I think, thank you so much to everybody for those observations. It's really interesting to hear them, and it's a shame that, I wonder if there's a way of making, we should all tweet so everyone should say what they thought was in. I mean, for me, it's I think you've summarized it so well, the group of you who were able to talk, which is that I think the external context is overwhelming. And I agree with you that it's creating a lot of noise in the system, a lot of anxiety in the system, actually. And I think, you know, people like Paul Polman are really important because he is creating even more noise in the system. And I think that that noise will, you know, push organizations on to do some of the things that Tammy's, you know, so well spoken of, really. So it would be great to think that we're moving forward. And I suspect we are, actually. Yeah.